The message that I want to share with you today is actually a message that it was one of my very first messages that I've ever preached. It worked out timing-wise for me to kind of revisit it. I was able to make some adjustments to it, but it's actually one of my favorite stories. But I want to begin by asking you the question: if you could capture one moment of your life, what would it be? Like, would that moment be like a particular moment in the past? Maybe you have this memory or this moment from your past, a marriage or a birth of a child or a promotion or something in your past. Maybe it's like if you could capture one moment in your life, maybe it would be a moment from the past, or maybe it would be a moment of regret. Maybe you had a moment in your life in which you looked back and you knew that you missed an opportunity or you missed a moment, and then there's regret. How many of us have spent a lot of our moments reflecting on the moments that we lost? Right? We spend our time consumed with thinking about the moments that we lost, only to realize that reflecting on the moments that we lost are in fact moments that we are losing. If you could take a moment and you could grab hold of it and you could squeeze out all of the life that it contained, shouldn't that moment be a moment in the future rather than in the past? What if you knew somewhere in front of you was a moment that would change your life forever? What if there was a moment that was rich with potential? A moment that was filled with endless possibilities? What if you knew that there was a moment coming, a divine moment orchestrated by God, where there was a moment in such a way that nothing in your life would be the same again? What if there was a defining moment where the choices you made determined the course and the momentum of your life? How would you prepare for it? How would you even identify that? You rarely know up front the eternal significance of a moment. When moments are missed, we often have these feelings or at least a glimpse of an opportunity lost. When you dream, you think about moments that are still yet to come. Yet the only moment that we have to take responsibility for right now is the moment that is right in front of us. This is our moment. Moments move in a timely manner, and time waits for no one. Last week, we took a look at the story of David, the life of David seizing a moment, finding himself in a position to take on Goliath, and in that space, he seized that moment with faith and confidence that God was going to move. And then today, we're going to look at another individual who lived in the moment. This is an introduction of sorts to a new character in the life of David. It's the story of Jonathan and his armor bearer. I want us to flip back to 1 Samuel 14. So this is before David and Goliath. We're going to be introduced to Jonathan. It tells us a story about the king's son. Of course, we know that Israel was asking for a king. They got Saul, and Saul turned out to be kind of a terrible king. Well, his son is Jonathan. Jonathan is this unusual character in the history of Israel. In fact, because his father was the very first king of Israel, it could be assumed that Jonathan would then be the heir to the throne, that Jonathan was going to be the next in line to inherit his father's throne. As we've discovered, that privilege has essentially been taken away from Jonathan and given to a shepherd out in the field named David. So we could look at that story and we could make an assumption that that is some sort of indictment on Jonathan. right? Well, Jonathan just must have not have been a good enough person, right? Jonathan, he couldn't have been the next king because there was something wrong with him. But the reality is that his place in history could be nothing further from that. He actually, there was one biographer that called him the best king who never reigned. See, Jonathan actually was described as a noble character, a noble with the courage and character that inspires other people to greatness. That's the kind of person Jonathan was. We could assume that it was because he couldn't hack it as king, but the reality is he was someone who was not rejected by God, but actually lived a legacy where he ended up being such an asset to King David. Jonathan never resented God for selecting David as the king. I mean, how many of us, like if we are heirs to the throne and it's given to somebody else, we might have an issue with that. But Jonathan doesn't. In fact, he became his greatest ally. Even when his father, when Saul wanted to kill David, Jonathan stood alongside David and supported him and encouraged him. Next week, we're going to dig into the friendship between David and Jonathan. But for today, we want to take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 14 that gives us this glimpse of this unique individual whose name is Jonathan, who didn't allow his circumstances to limit the impact of his life. All right, 1 Samuel 14, starting in verse 1. One day Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah in the pomegranate cave at Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men, including Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. So he's the priest of the Lord, Ahijah is. And the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. Within the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on the one side and a rocky crag on the other side. I like that word, crag. The name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Sina. The one crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come on, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." You got to love Jonathan here. Jonathan doesn't say to his armor bearer, "God has guaranteed us victory." No, what he says is, maybe God will move. Like, that's faith. It's not certainty. In fact, it's living in a confidence about God's ability. There's no certainty that he's going to move on their behalf. And so he steps out because he knows that God is able. And by the way, probably the least motivational military speech ever. Right? He wakes up his armor bearer and he's like, "Hey, you ready? Like, let's go do this." And the armor bearer's like, "Well, what's the plan?" And he's like, "I don't know, but maybe God will be with us." That's it. That's the plan. Maybe. It goes on in verse 7. It says, his armor bearer responds to him and says, "Do all that is in your heart. Do as you wish. Behold, I am with you heart and soul." Everybody needs that friend in their life. Everybody needs a friend that's just a little crazy. Right? Just a little crazy. Jonathan says, "Let's attack an army." Armor bearer's like, "I'm on it. Let's go." No questions, no risk assessment, no follow-up. Like, he's just like, "I'm with you. Let's do it." Then Jonathan said, "Behold, we will cross over to the men and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, Wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this shall be the sign to us. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. The Philistines said, look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. And the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, you guys come up to us and we're going to show you a thing. So this is biblical trash talking. That's what this is. The Philistines are talking trash, which is a good lesson for all of us. Never underestimate the motivational power behind a good insult. Because sometimes your critics accidentally become your confirmation. And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. If I'm the armor bearer, by the way, I'm like, yeah, I'm right behind you, bro. Like, you go first. Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and his feet, and his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed them after him. And that first strike, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, killed about 20 men within, as it were, half a furrow's length in an acre of land. Historically, an acre was originally defined as the amount of land a yoke of oxen could plow in a single day. So half a furrow of an acre is a proverbial expression indicating an incredibly tight, restricted space. It was in a very small space that he killed these men. So here's a few things that I want us to learn this morning from this story as we, as a church, are headed into the direction we believe the Lord has for us. The first is this: divine moments always demand initiative. Have you ever found yourself in circumstances where you're faced with situations, you're faced with a situation where you choose to do nothing? It's not that you choose evil. You're not choosing evil. You just choose to not get involved. It's becoming more and more of an issue in our society today, where we have a litigious culture, and so people are afraid to get involved. They're afraid to step in. People mind their own business, or worse, they pull out their phones and just record things, but they don't get involved. And honestly, I find that choices between good and evil, I find that to be pretty clear in the minds of and hearts of most believers. Like, I think that people understand these two things, and it's not here that we become paralyzed or here that we become paralyzed. It's kind of in the middle. It's like once I turn away from my sin, once I have chosen not to live an evil life, the question that we should be asking is, what do we do next? How do I distinguish now between all of the good choices that are in front of me? You would think that having unlimited options would be the platform for freedom, but the reality is it's just generally not the case. I talk to people all the time who would say that their understanding of Christianity is to just avoid evil. Like, as long as I'm not evil, as long as I'm not sinning, then I'm a Christian. But Christianity, especially in our culture, has put such an emphasis on avoiding evil that we have become virtually blind to the endless opportunities for us to do good. We've defined holiness from what we separate ourselves from rather than what we give ourselves to. I'm convinced that one of the greatest tragedies is not the sins that we commit, but it's the life that we fail to live. We don't get to follow God in neutral. We don't just get to get our fire insurance, our insurance from hell, and then all of a sudden just live in neutral. It's not enough to just stop the wrong and then be paralyzed when it comes to the right. God created us to do good, and He created us to have initiative. Samuel describes the dilemma that Jonathan faced. He told us that Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah. Some translations say the pomegranate cave. Some say pomegranate tree. Whatever it was pomegranate. And he has 600 men with him. 600 men. And yet they're just asleep under a tree. And he has all the resources necessary to move forward. He knows the promises of God. He has even God's priest there, and yet he refuses to move. The greatest danger that success brings to any of us, aside from arrogance, is the fear of losing what has been gained. Once success is obtained, our ability to risk is lost. This is what I mean by that. The more that you move with a God-given urgency, the more you step out in faith, and the more you're like, okay, God, I'm gonna seize this moment. I'm gonna step into it. The more we do that, the more God often entrusts to us. Right? So if you're good stewards with things, you're good stewards with your time and what he's called you to do, and then he begins to entrust more with you. And then as he blesses your life, your influence grows, your responsibility increases, and now you have more to lose. And the more you have to lose, the greater the risk can feel when God calls you to take another step. If we're not careful, the very blessings that God has given us can become the things that we hold on to the tightest. The success or comfort could be stability or security, right? Those things that once came from following God and pursuing him with a sense of urgency, now all of a sudden can be the very reason that we hesitate to follow him into the next step. In a strange way, you could say it like this: yesterday's blessings become today's biggest obstacles to seizing the divine moments that God has for us. This was what I was alluding to weeks ago when I shared with you how easy it was for us to be praying with a sense of urgency. God, provide for us. God, bring us people. God, help us have an impact in this community. And we sell a piece of property, and now financially we're provided for and we're taken care of, and it's easy. Now it's like we have a congregation and a church and a community, and it's like now we have a lot to lose. But is the thing that God has provided us become the thing that's keeping us from taking that next step in this season? Jesus described the person who leaves his talent unused as wicked. For some strange reason, many believers have come to think that they can't have passions, right? That their passions are always in conflict with their relationship with God. The reality is that there are few things more inspiring than watching someone live with the passionate clarity and purpose. You probably have people like this in your life, people who you look at and you're like, man, it's a beautiful thing to watch, right? But what happens, if we're being honest, what can happen is it can have this interesting effect on us. We don't want to call it envy or jealousy, because we're Christians, right? But what it can produce are things like admiration and longing. We watch someone else's life and we think, I wish I had that kind of courage. I wish I had that kind of faith. Man, that person lives with such purpose for their life. I wish I had that kind of purpose. And then one of the ways that we cope with that feeling is by convincing ourselves, well, those people are just different than us. They must be more talented than us. They must have more experience or they must be more privileged than us, more opportunity than us. They must be more connected. And we use these excuses, we use these reasons for why they're functioning so well in their purpose, and we do it because if those people are ordinary people like you and me, then it's available to us as well. And that's a much more uncomfortable thought. Deep down, we know that there is no lasting satisfaction in watching someone else live the life that we were created to live. You can't experience God's calling secondhand. We were never created to spend our life on the sidelines, applauding other people's faith or courage, applauding other people as they step out into risk, into seeing what God has for them. Those men and women whose lives that we admire, who somehow seem to live life to the fullest, those people that we love to applaud, those people would probably tell you they're no different. They're no different than you. They're no different than me. It's just about moving out of passivity. It's not living life in neutral. It's about a refusal to live life in neutral and to value the irreplaceable nature of every single moment. For these individuals, time is a commodity. It's about treating every single day that they wake up in the morning as an opportunity and a gift from God. The second thing I want us to see is that faith acts without knowing everything. Sometimes the greatest hindrance to experiencing the adventure that God has us on is certainty. That everything's going to be all right. That we will be safe. Jonathan was certain about some things, and at the same time, he was able and willing to operate in the realm of uncertainty. Jonathan understood that nothing is guaranteed, right? He doesn't say God guarantees victory. He says, maybe. That's uncertainty. Maybe God will intervene on our behalf. Maybe the Lord will work for us. There's some things in life that we can know, and then there are some things that we won't know. He goes on to say, nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. And I think this is the clear picture and perspective that we have to see. He knew for certain that God was powerful enough to get the job done. He knew that. It didn't matter if it was 2 of them. It didn't matter that there was 1,000 of the Philistines. This part was clear, that God is able. His father's, Saul's apprehension to go to war is somewhat reasonable. I mean, if you think about it, yes, he had 600 men, but they only had a couple of swords. Right? So it seems obvious to us, like we're looking at it and we're like, yeah, I could see why he's still asleep under the tree. Like that kind of makes sense, but it's not an excuse to neglect the purpose of God. And so if it was only Jonathan and his armor bearer and only Jonathan with a sword, he would still move in line with God's mission. Jonathan had this unwavering confidence in God's capacity. He had absolute trust in God's character. And even though he did not know what the outcome might be, he knew who God was, who God is, and that settled it for him. Jonathan's focus was not like, what is God's will for my life? His focus was, how can I give my life for God's will? And that's a question we all have to ask. He had no certainty concerning his well-being, but he knew that he was moving in line with God's purpose. Imagine that you're Jonathan's armor bearer. Jonathan shakes you, It's dark out. Maybe there's a campfire, the light of the moon, but that's it. That's the light. And he wakes you up, right? Jonathan wakes you up, and you're like, what? Like, leave me alone. You were in your REM sleep, right? You know this? And now he's waking you up, and he's like, come on, let's go into the darkness. No. That's my response. No, I'm not doing that. Go back to sleep. You're having a bad dream, or you're sleepwalking, or whatever. No, he's like, come on, let's go into the darkness. He wakes you up. He tells you to follow him there. Everyone else has fallen asleep. Jonathan, most of us read this story and we're like, Jonathan just must have had a death wish. Jonathan wasn't choosing to die in this moment. Jonathan was choosing how he was going to live. Number 3, God uses influence more than authority. 2 roadblocks that often mislead us: a lack of authority and a lack of resources. Jonathan would have totally been justified in choosing to do nothing. It was just him and his armor bearer, and between the two of them, they had one weapon, right? It's clear Jonathan knew his limited sphere of influence. And the way that he handles this circumstance in this situation is something we can all learn from. Because it's interesting to note that Jonathan had to sneak out, right? They had to be quiet. Why did they have to do that? Because his dad, this is a unapproved mission. I'm sure he tried to get his dad to approve the mission, but Saul, neither king nor dad, gave in to that request. And what's probably more important to notice in this story is that as limited as his resources were, it would have been tempting to try to start a coup, to go and wrestle up some of the other men and be like, hey, we got this mission that we're going on. You guys want to come with us? I mean, as the king's son, they probably would have felt obligated to do that. And yet he doesn't. He understood authority and he understood his influence. He didn't attempt to override the king who had the rightful authority. He didn't steal or take something that wasn't his. Saul had given him a sword. It was his right to use it. Saul had placed a man under his command, and he had the authority to call him out to follow him. I think it's interesting how Jonathan phrases his request. Jonathan doesn't command his armor bearer to go. He just politely asks him, right? And some would argue that because of Jonathan's authority over the armor bearer, that there's this position of power that the armor bearer didn't have any choice. But you can hear the enthusiasm behind this crazy armor bearer. He says, do all that you have in mind. Go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul. I will follow you into anything. This is the essence of influence. To win the heart and soul of another person through the strength of your character and your personhood. It's why influence is way more powerful than authority. Authority can shape what a person does, but influence actually shapes who a person becomes. Influence is courageous. It's also contagious. Here's how you know that influence is contagious. If you look right in the middle of the word, you find the word flu. The word flu, that's right, it's contagious, right? Terrible. People who are influential pass on what they have like they have the flu. If you don't want what they got, stay away from them. Right? And through our character, here's what we do. It doesn't matter, every one of us are influential in some capacity to some people. And we pass on our attitudes. We pass on our values or other life-shaping virtues. And all of us pass a bit of ourselves on to others. So here's the key. You better like who you are, and you better make sure that you give to others from yourself that what you give to others from yourself is a gift and not a curse. But we're all influential, and you'll never forget that word again. Faith requires risk. Number 4, we only have 12 today. Just kidding. When Jonathan spoke to his armor bearer and convinced him to go with him to engage the Philistines, not only did he acknowledge his uncertainty of whether or not God was going to be with them, but then he lays out the most dangerous strategy that makes him look a little nuts. He says, all right, come then, we'll cross over toward the men and we will let them see us. Now, I wasn't in the military. I appreciate everybody that served in the military. I wasn't even a Boy Scout. I didn't even do Royal Rangers as a kid. Like, this is the limit of my knowledge. But I do know this. I think that's a terrible strategy to let the enemy see you. Like, sneak up, hide in the shadows. All of those things seem to make sense to me. But when you're outmanned and outnumbered and out-equipped, showing yourself to them seems like a terrible idea. He was stepping into a moment where he knew that God would have to come through. How many times do we step out in a moment where we are so dependent on God to come through? Or do we weigh all of the circumstances and all of the risk involved before we take a step? He wasn't being presumptuous about God. He just clearly knew who God was. But he also understood the consequences of his actions. I think the most important decisions of our lives will require us to forsake invisibility and risk becoming visible. I think like Jonathan, we choose to cross over to the other side and let people see us for who we are in Christ. They showed themselves to the Philistine outposts, and now they're kind of at this point of no return. One of the most asked questions that pastors get is, am I in the will of God? Or what is God's will for my life? Those are questions that as pastors, and I'm sure priests, and any person who is in any sort of leadership, like people come and say, I want to know what God's will is for my life. We want a detailed map. We want a plan. And we want God to spell it out for us. And then we'll just follow the instructions. Okay, if that's the will of God, that's where I'm going. It's not how this works, right? Like, I don't know what God's will is for your life. I mean, I know spiritually the direction that God would like you to go, but you hear from God. We want it clear and uncomplicated. And for a lot of us, because we aren't hearing the will of God for our life, we find ourselves shifting back into neutral. It's comfortable in neutral. But I want to remind you that nowhere has it ever been promised that the Christian life would be easy or comfortable. There's a saying that says the safest place to be is in the center of the will of God. And over the years, I've gotten a lot of pushback on my stance on this, but I still stand by it. I'm sure that the intention of that statement is good, but I just think it's misdirected. I'm sure the thought process of the safest place to be is in the center of God's will came from a mom or a dad who was trying to comfort their small child. Or it was maybe a concerned parent who their kid is getting ready to go off to college, and it becomes a warning to them. Hey, get outside of God's will, and guess what? You're going to be in big trouble. Whatever the motivation, the result has brought damage. And hear me out, if the safest place is in the center of the will of God, then the appropriate measure of God's will for our life is the test, is it safe? So then, what we have concluded is that God promises safety to us. And those who are outside of God's will experience danger. Today's culture has eliminated the place for risk in our life, and it's surrounded us with the comfort and the security of this theology.